Hello and welcome to the Oregonian Sports Podcast. Oregon State is not Washington State's buddy, but I'm Bill Oram, and I'm joined, as always, by my buddy, Brenna Greene from Coin 6 in Portland, Oregon. Brenna, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. It's a morning where I am up and awake because we're having Sick Brenna round 2 on the podcast this week. So
the people responded to Sick Brenna week 1, so why not double down?
I mean, why not? Why not? If it's working, don't try to fix it, right?
Brenna, the Ducks are on a bye coming off a big win in Madison, Wisconsin. Looks like Tez Johnson is going to be back when they return in 2 weeks against Washington. Oregon State hosts Washington State on Saturday. Should the Cougars intentionally throw the game? We will talk about that. And the Portland Trailblazers are on a 3-game winning streak because DeAndre Ayton has not been in the lineup. Called that one. But I do want to start with the comments from Jake Dickert, the extremely likable and competitive head coach at Washington State University, who yesterday said in his weekly media availability, and I quote, "I've never gotten into, like, they're our buddy. Oregon State's not our buddy. They would have left us as fast as we would have left them. This is what it is. It's one of our biggest rivals now." Brenna, does anything about that quote offend you, upset you, or get you particularly fired up for this big rivalry game on Saturday?
No, I mean, first of all, he's right. Like, if OSU had an option to go somewhere else, they would have gone. If WSU had an option to go somewhere else, they would have gone. Like, they were forced friends. That doesn't mean that it's a bad friendship, but they were forced to be buddies in this situation. They didn't have anywhere else to turn. I guess I have a unique insight into this rivalry just because I have covered both programs back to back, and I covered Jake Dickert for a few years. I guess technically a year and a half if you think about how he got to be head coach at WSU.
Mm-hmm.
So, I know him well enough to know that he's just spitting the truth. That's all. I don't know. How can you be offended if it's something that's true? And both sides would acknowledge that. It's nice to have a head coach who actually says something in a Monday presser. That's cool. We have 2 head coaches in this state who do not want to say anything interesting in their Monday pressers. Very different ways, but they both have no intention of saying anything interesting to the media whatsoever. So that's nice. I would like to thank Jake Dickert for giving us something to talk about. I appreciate you, sir. But other than that, I mean, I don't know. I just can't. I mean, when something's true, it's true. That's just kind of how I feel about it. So, yeah.
It's one of those things where I feel like we have, over the last year and a half, sort of, you said forced friends, and I like that, where we've sort of operated in this world where Oregon State and Washington State are just the same, and therefore they're buddies. And I think that institutionally that has been true, right? I think the presidents, athletic directors have had to be way more collaborative, one-to-one than schools in the Pac-12 historically have ever had to be, because they moved as a body of 12 or 10 or 8. And now it's a body, or it has been a body of 2 to get to the point where you bring in these other schools into the conference that, is going to start in 2026. But, the idea that would trickle down onto the field where there would be all these good vibes around this game, I think is a little unrealistic. And I got a kick out of it last year, right? Mm-hmm. Last year, the game was played in Pullman, week 4 or 5. Oregon was hosting Colorado that weekend. But Oregon State goes to Pullman. And do you remember that there was a joint press conference between the
yes.
ADs or presidents? But
both.
But the both. Okay, so administrators at Oregon State and Washington State. The backdrop had Beavers and Cougars on it. There was this real, teamwork sort of component of it. But again, that's all at the administrative level. And, I think you can have appreciation for the fact that Washington State and Oregon State have shared in a pretty unique experience over the last year and a half. But here's the other thing. Oregon State is now on a completely different path and trajectory than Washington State. Washington State, until Saturday, still felt like it had an outside shot at the CFP. Is going to go to a really good bowl game. Was 7-1, was ranked. They've got their own house to care for, from a football standpoint. Whereas Oregon State has lost 5 straight games, is likely to end the season on a 7-game losing streak unless they are able to, rise up against the Cougars on Saturday, which right now you wouldn't expect. Cougs are favored by 14 points on the road. So they're just in very different places from a football standpoint at the moment. The Cougs were able to maintain a little bit more continuity. They didn't lose their coach. They didn't lose. I mean, they did lose their AD, and obviously Washington State has had its own set of problems. But from a football standpoint, Oregon State has been hit harder. And so I understand exactly what Jake Dickert is saying. Of course they would have stabbed the other one in the back as quickly as possible. Nobody wants to be in this situation. Nobody wants to be one of the 2 schools that was left behind. So, of course that's true. But what Jake Dickert did was he broke from the narrative of the past year and a half, which is that, we're buddies off the field, but we're, enemies on it, or that we can still fight our brother. And, Oregon State and Washington State historically, this has not been a rivalry in any actual sense. I mean, there have been similarities, right? Like you're talking about the land-grant schools in the Northwest, some of the hardest to reach places in the Pac-12. But nobody was ever like, I'm really excited for that big rivalry game with the Cougs this year. That isn't a thing. And so it's a little bit forced right now, but it certainly does take on a new tone going forward, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been a fun series over the last few years.
Sure.
Like whenever OSU and Washington State played, when I was covering the team in Pullman, it was like, oh, this is going to be a good game, because almost always it has been. Now there have been a few bad ones over the last few years, but there have also been some really good ones. In fact, I was literally deleting stuff from my phone last night, and I saw the clip on my phone of WSU's running back Max Borghi running it in against OSU. I believe that was to get bowl eligible or something like that a few years ago. Was it 2020? My gosh, I don't think it was 2020. I think it was 2019. In fact, I know it was 2019. Mike Leach was still the coach there. So like there are some really great games, but yeah, I mean, and, but Dickert was calling for this to be a rivalry now. He did say that. He did say, hey, like this should be a rivalry game now, because this is the person that is on our level, So I think it will develop into more of that over the years, but that's going to take time. Rivalries take time. They don't just spring up out of nowhere, to say the least.
Yeah, you don't just get to call a game a rivalry, and I covered the Lakers for 9 years, as people know, and every single time, I swear to heaven, every single time the Lakers and Clippers would play, they played 4 times a year. Every gosh darn time the Lakers and Clippers played, someone would come to the Lakers shoot-around or pregame, or the Clippers shoot-around pregame, and say, is this a rivalry? And the Lakers would say, banners, no, it's not a rivalry. And the Clippers would say, yeah, but we've won 12 straight games against you, so not a rivalry. But it never had the actual makings of a rivalry, because there was no real hate or animosity between the sides. There was never any stakes. They'd never played with anything on the line. Oregon and Oregon State is a rivalry because they are in-state schools, for sure, that always played on the same level, but also because they played at the end of the year. And you carried bragging rights through the rest of the year, because especially over the last 20 years, there was very often something, on the line for, one of the 2 teams to reach the Rose Bowl, or, wherever in the postseason. Oregon State, Washington State hasn't had that. It will start having that. If this is going to be it's obviously not the last game of the year this year. The Beavers play Boise State. But if it's going to be at the very end or near the very end of the season, there will start to be things on the line, because the Beavers aren't going to be terrible forever. They will find they will settle back to where they belong, and they will start to build. It might take some time, but they're going to build, and they're going to get back to competitive. The Cougars are going to remain good as well. because you are talking about the two flagship institutions of the new Pac-12. I mean, Boise State arrives with the best football program. I don't think there's really any question. But the flagship programs of this new Pac-12 are Washington State and Oregon State.
Still need to get that 8th team.
Right. We're assuming this conference actually ends up getting off the ground in 2026, and that realignment doesn't come and shatter it all before we even get there. But yes, do need an 8th team.
I feel like everybody's forgotten that they still do need another team.
Right. But they have time. They have what, like 6 months, 8 months?
No, they have a year and a half ish.
I think that's by July 25. They have to have it all together, right? Or is it by July 26?
I think it's 26, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
The point being here,
yes,
we do have the we decided we have a name for this, by the way, this game? Oregon State, Washington State?
I feel like you bounced around a few names last year, but
that doesn't sound like me.
That doesn't sound like you ever. No, not you at all.
Well, the one I liked last year because it was being played in Pullman, and it was right when these two were banding together, was the Truce and the Palouse. But it isn't so much a truce, and it's not in the Palouse, so I feel like that was more of a one-time thing as opposed to the actual rivalry. But like the Agriculture Bowl or the Land Grant Bowl or something like that is probably, it's not as clever as I'd like, but it certainly achieves the spirit of it. The Left Behind Bowl, or remember on game day last year the Nobody Wants Us Bowl, which got misconstrued as the Nobody Watches Us Bowl, which got a bunch of people offended. If you want to talk about Jake Dickert offending people, it was the Nobody Watches Us Bowl, which was actually the Nobody Wants Us Bowl from Lee Corso, and got everybody's hackles up. That was a thing. That was a moment in time. Do you, assuming you don't have anything to say about that, if you do, go ahead, but do you give the Beavers any chance of winning on Saturday against the Cougs, given the state of these two teams?
Oh, gosh. No. I mean, OSU is just... Boy, what an epic faceplant. I mean, oh my God. We went from high hopes after that, not high hopes, but hey, this team is going to get bowl eligible after that Colorado State game to, my God, the rug has been pulled out from underneath us. I mean, Saturday was a historically bad performance, especially considering the team you were playing only had 2 wins so far this year. You can't even score points against them? Yeah, I don't know how you get up and rally for the next 2 games. The good news is I'm not a coach, so I don't have to figure that out. I don't get paid that money. So, but it's just not. It's not looking great, I would say, especially after WSU goes and loses last week. Like, they're going to come into this thing fired up because they went and laid an egg at New Mexico. Yuck. Somebody who has past experience covering the Mountain West as well. Another team that I don't remember the last time they were necessarily super competitive. Let's put it that way. So, they're going to come in.
They're going to get bowl eligible. They end the season with New Mexico State. They're going to get bowl eligible down there in Albuquerque in the first year of Bronco Mendenhall's reign. So it is good for them. But you're completely right. You're completely right about the quality of that program. And this is still a middling Mountain West team. But go ahead.
So they're going to. The moral of the story is that WSU is going to come into this thing fired up after what happened last week, and I just don't. I don't know how OSU is going to get fired up, especially with what happened, and then also their injury situation. So, yeah, I'm just not. I'm not super bullish about how this is going to go for the Beavs. What about you?
Same. I mean, listen, it's going to be essentially a night game at home. Beavers are thorny at home. Even UNLV, that was a competitive game. Now they made it more competitive at the end, but the Beavers, I wouldn't expect them to lay down, but I'm really concerned about the state of this offense. Obviously, you lose Ben Branson last week. I know we talked about it on the podcast. He ends up being injured. You can't really make a decision between Giovanni McCoy and Jabari Johnson. Who knows what it's going to look like this week? But even if it was, hey, we don't have Ben, we have Giovanni McCoy. Giovanni McCoy is the guy you trusted to start the first, 8 or 9 games of the season. So, that shouldn't feel like a huge drop off. And, we talk about the injuries at Oregon State. The injuries on offense haven't been that significant. Now they've lost a little bit on the line, and Jam Griffin obviously is a key piece of the offense. Yeah. But other than that, I mean, the offense hasn't had the injuries that the defense has had. So I'm just not understanding how you end up getting blanked, even with a couple of holes, getting completely blanked at Air Force. Before Saturday, Air Force had the fewest points Air Force had allowed in a game was 6 against Merrimack. Merrimack is an FCS school that lost 21-6 and currently has a record of 4-6 at the FCS level, or total, but including that game. It is 4-6 this year. Plays as an independent in the FCS. Okay, that's the only other team that has struggled to score against Air Force, and they still scored 6 points. Other than that, New Mexico. You just talked about New Mexico not being very good. New Mexico scored 52 points on Air Force.
Oh my God.
Navy scored 34. Wyoming, which lost to Idaho, scored 31 points. Fresno State lost, but scored 28 points. So going scoreless at Air Force, and sure, there's altitude. Sure, you're on the road, but there's no excuse. And so then you get into, well, is this the play calling? Is Ryan Gunderson over his head? Is it a lack of focus, attention to detail, effort? Have the players given up? Because you are right. A historic faceplant? Yeah. You start thinking back historically, like what loss would you say rivals a 28-0 loss at a bad Air Force? And, there have been some for sure.
Oh, yeah.
2019 Oregon, or 2019 Utah, one of those Oregon games in there. You can go back to some FCS losses, lost to Sacramento State, lost to Eastern Washington. But, you lose to Eastern Washington in 2013. That's a Mike Riley team that gets bowl eligible. In terms of where this team should be and where it is, and then to just completely lay an egg when you still have a shot at getting bowl eligible, really is difficult for me to comprehend. And especially when you consider the fact that, Trent Bray, from the time he got hired but all the way through the summer, was still, dropping breadcrumbs that he thought this could be a team that reached the CFP. That was not true. That doesn't exist. There is no version of this team, healthy, whatever else, that would have been good enough to run the table on this schedule. But when we saw this schedule, Brenna, there was zero part of me, and especially when they started 4-1, when they started 4-1, there was no part of me that thought they won't get bowl eligible, because this schedule was designed for them to get bowl eligible. The reason you play this schedule is so you can at least maintain the illusion of being good. Maybe you're beating up on not good teams, but hey, you lost your coach, you lost all your players, you lost your conference, but hey, look at us. We're still in a bowl game. And then you can take that and go recruit. They don't have that. And so the bottom has fallen out on Oregon State, not just on this season, but I do think a little bit institutionally. And I don't think that Trent Bray should be fired. I don't think that, the Beavers should be paying a $4.8 million buyout to get rid of Trent Bray. I don't even necessarily know if firing Ryan Gunderson's the answer, or Keith Hayward, the defensive coordinator. I just know that, Oregon State is at a real inflection point because everything you did this year failed. And it really can't keep failing. Otherwise, you're going to be back to where you were when Gary Anderson was the coach. Because it's hard to get players in Corvallis. And it's going to be even harder if you don't have an NIL program that is competitive, and if you don't have a foundation of success to sell. The reason you hire Trent Bray as your head coach is to maintain at least some of the momentum from the Jonathan Smith era, because Trent is a continuation of that. He is an extension of what Jonathan Smith did.
Yeah.
But that didn't come to fruition. And so if you go 4-8, miss a bowl game, and you lose to Air Force, San Jose State, UNLV, Washington State, I mean, it's like, and aren't even really that competitive in those games, Nevada, what do you have to sell? Like, people, like, recruits better really like wearing orange. They better look great in orange.
Yeah, and I mean, it's we aren't sitting in the rooms with these coaches when they're recruiting and things like that, but this is no slight. This is just what it is. Like, it's not like Trent Bray has the most charismatic personality that's ever existed as well. That's not me being mean. It's just, I mean, like, go watch the press conferences. That doesn't mean that he can't be successful. I mean, I wouldn't say that Jonathan Smith's press conferences were super charismatic either, to be completely frank with you. But it makes it certainly more difficult to get out of this rut that you are in. And they are in a rut. They're going to have to go out and try to get another quarterback this offseason, which is going to be difficult. You're going to have to hope you get another diamond in the rough, which, they kind of put 3 guys in there and said, y'all battle it out. That obviously none of them really had it.
They're still battling out.
Yeah.
Their 11th game is their 11th game is on Saturday, and they're still battling out. They don't have a quarterback in the 11th game of the season. This team's been practicing together since August.
And also, like, if I'm Ben Branson, I'm like, I gotta think about the future here. Like, he's going to medical school. Like, if I'm him, I'm like, I've put this team over myself time and again. So, I just, man, it's a rough position they're in right now, to say the least. And I don't see this road getting any smoother over the next 2 weeks, to say the least. So,
speaking of roads and the relative smoothness of them,
oh yeah,
I do want to talk about the Oregon Ducks.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we know they are number 1. We know that they won a squeaker at Wisconsin that we can get into. They are not mathematically assured of a spot in the Big Ten championship game, but they are going to the Big Ten championship game. And what happens there in Indianapolis against either Ohio State, Indiana, to me, really sets the stage for their chances of winning a national championship. If I'm the Ducks, I am extremely nervous about any scenario where I don't have the first round bye. Now, you could be hosting Boise State in a first round game if you are the 5 seed. And maybe you like the Ducks' chances better in round 2. They would be pretty darn fired up, I think, to not find themselves in the position they were against the Broncos the first time. But that's a good Boise State team.
Yep.
The Ducks have gotten a lot better since week 2 as well. My question for you is, not can the Ducks win the national championship if they don't have a first round bye? Because, of course, I think they can. But how vital do you think it is that they essentially run the table the rest of the way? Because they could mathematically take a loss. They could lose to Washington and still make the playoff. They could beat Washington and lose in the Big Ten and still make the playoff. But do they need that first round bye to get to where they need to go?
Just an aside, good Lord, can you imagine if Dan Lanning lost to Washington again? The absolute panic.
No, I mean, like, it's head exploding stuff, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we will talk about that next week. But like the idea of Lanning falling to 0-4 against Washington, and especially this Washington team,
Yeah.
I literally can't imagine it. There have been a lot of things I could talk myself into over the course of this season. Losing to Purdue, even like as a sort of like mental exercise. I can't do it with Washington. So anyway, continue.
Yeah. Your brain just goes, nope, not happening. Nope. Yeah, I agree with you there. But yeah, let's head to Indy in our brains. Yeah, I mean, that bye is so crucial just from like a health standpoint.
Yes.
Like playing, I mean, first of all, these teams, no matter, depending upon how far you go, could be playing 3 to 4, I guess I shouldn't say 3 to 4, 2 to 3 extra games. Because, or I guess you could say 1 to 2 extra games, depending upon how it all works out. With how the playoff was set up before and how it's set up now. You lose time to just sit and get your team healthy if you have to play that round of 12 game. There's just a lot going on there that's very important in terms of, I just think, a simple health perspective of a squad. So, that's the thing that stands out the most to me, is that you want that bye so that A, your team can get healthy, and B, more injuries do not occur. Because potentially playing 4 games is, especially this time of year when everyone is worn down, is not a fun proposition, I think, for most head coaches. So, yeah, I think that's the thing that really jumps out at me and screams at me when it comes to wanting that bye. Is just something from a health perspective. Because I don't think that it becomes, I mean, if Oregon loses and they play at home, I feel pretty confident about that team in that situation. It's the accumulated wear and tear that concerns me the most about playing that extra game. So, seems like you agree with me.
I do. I think the health point cannot be overstated. And, we've seen how much injuries can affect, any team. Oregon's no different. I mean, they've been very fortunate that they've had injuries at positions where they do have quite a bit of depth. One of those positions is not really on the offensive line. So, having an injury on the offensive line, I think last week affected them at Wisconsin. I think, they missed Tez Johnson badly in the passing game, even though they've had guys who've been able to step up, and the passing game was a real struggle against Wisconsin, but, it was still a strength against Michigan and Maryland. But health aside, I also just want to think about the path, because if you get the bye, you are going almost certainly in the quarterfinal to Pasadena and the Rose Bowl. And I just have to tell you that it is you do not want to end up, if you are Oregon, I don't think, in the Peach Bowl or the Sugar Bowl, because you are in the heart of SEC country and there's a good chance you're playing an SEC team. So, you're traveling more. You probably don't have any kind of, fan advantage. The Fiesta Bowl is also a quarterfinal, and, I think the Ducks would travel well to the Fiesta Bowl as well.
Yeah.
But if you are the number 1 overall seed, I just don't see how the Ducks aren't placed in.
They will be
in Pasadena.
They will.
So
be.
that
That's
okay. Yeah. So like to me, that makes the most sense, and you're right. Yeah, that's right. It just makes the most sense that that's what you want. Now you could win, and you look at some of the teams they could conceivably play in a first round game in Eugene. At this point, depending on how things play out, it could be Boise State. It could be Texas. Could be Georgia. I mean, probably not Georgia after its win over Tennessee. It could be Tennessee. It could be Colorado if Boise State jumps in and Colorado wins the Big 12. If Boise State's ranked higher than Colorado when it's all said and done, which I think could happen. I'm not scared of Colorado. I'm not scared of, Boise State necessarily. But I'm scared of like a Penn State, Notre Dame, Texas, an SEC, opponent if it's Alabama. I just think that it's really hairy. And like you said, what is the wear and tear and the attrition of that game? Because you basically have to win what's going to be one of the probably the toughest game on your schedule so far to date. And, with the exception, I guess, of those Ohio State games. But what shape is your team going to be in after that to then go prepare again for a game that at that point is probably going to be across the country in 10 days? Like, that just makes it a whole lot tougher. So, I guess it feels like stating the obvious, but if I'm the Ducks, even though I feel like technically the Ducks are playing with a bit of house money here, but I do not want to feel like I'm playing with house money. Like, you've got to sprint through the finish line and and beat Washington, obviously, but also win that Big Ten championship game to have a chance, I think, to really be favored to bring home the first national championship.
And I just think too, like, this is also stating the obvious, but my goodness, do they need this bye right now? I mean, like, that game against Wisconsin was a classic. We are tired game. That was the vibe of that whole game, was that this team is just tired, which, by the way, who can blame them? They played 8 games in a row. Like, they've had a crazy schedule, especially with how the buys have worked out. I mean, they had a bye the first week of conference play, and they don't get another bye until the second to last week of conference play. That is crazy. So yeah, I mean, they just, like, this team needs this time to reset, I think, a lot. You were in Madison, correct?
I was.
Tell me about your experience. I want to hear about it. I'm curious.
It was rad. I'm gonna go with rad as the descriptor. Cool town. Weather was great. I got 23,000 steps on Saturday. It was also my birthday, so I just was out and about and walking around and being among the people. So that was fun.
Bill Oram, man of the people.
That's me. And so I just want to piggyback on your point about the schedule and the bye. The bye was a real disadvantage for them in terms of, like, the schedule, right? Like, to have to go 8 games, 3 of those last 5 being in the Central and Eastern time zone. But now that you've survived that gauntlet, this is a real gift. Not just because you need the bye to recover, but because you get a bye, you get an opponent that you are going to be very fired up to cream in Washington. And then you are going to play, I just don't see how it's not Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. So you get the week to reset, and then you get 2 weeks essentially to prepare. You essentially are getting 3 weeks to prepare for Ohio State. That, I think, is a real advantage because, Ohio State has to deal with Indiana this weekend and then Michigan in the finale and then Oregon. So I think Oregon is much more set up to be refreshed when they play Ohio State. Washington is a game where, I mean, the Ducks backups could be playing the second half of that game.
Yeah.
So I just think the Ducks are, I think the schedule broke in a very disadvantageous way, but now that they're here and they survived it and they're 11-0, it's a huge advantage. Okay, so Madison had never been, did not really give a ton of thought to the geography of Madison and the fact that the center of the city is on the little isthmus between 2 lakes. Say isthmus 10 times fast. And what that does to traffic on a Wisconsin, on a Badger weekend, a Badger football weekend. Was not prepared for that because I sat in the back of some Ubers, and there's something about Ubers in Madison. I talked to a couple of other people who said the same thing, like just a lot of Axe body spray happening in those Ubers. So, like, really strong odor, like, cologne in the backs of Ubers, and I don't know why. And so when you're in it for 30 minutes to go 3 miles, it does kind of affect your head, and you start hallucinating a little bit. But I will say Camp Randall, incredible environment. Those fans were ready to rock. The students were great. I was down on the field for the last 5 minutes of the game. It was loud. The fans were super engaged. It was funny to watch when Oregon forces the 4th down stop with, 2 minutes left. watching fans leave, and then the Ducks fake the field goal and get stopped and give the ball right back to the Badgers. And those same fans came streaming back in. That was funny to watch, only to then be disappointed again when Mateo Uiagalelei makes just an incredible, an incredibly astute and aware play to grab that interception after Jamari Caldwell tips the ball. So, I mean, great finish from the Oregon standpoint. I mean, Wisconsin fans obviously were pulling their hair out. Luke Fickell ends up firing his offensive coordinator after the game. Shout out to Tosh Lupoi. Like, I don't know if Tosh Lupoi is like, I don't know how many offensive coordinators Tosh Lupoi can take credit for getting fired throughout his career, but he's certainly had some struggles at Oregon and has been has taken some arrows over the first couple of years here, especially after games against Washington. So for him to have this defense where it is pretty great, but also got a guy fired this weekend. So fun environment. I loved the fake field goal. I would love to know what you thought of that, because
interesting.
I thought it was the only reason I didn't like the fake field goal was, if I'm smart enough to predict it and know it's coming, then you would think Wisconsin probably knew it was coming, because if you know anything about Dan Lanning, there is no world in which Dan Lanning wants to give the ball back to the other team with only a 6-point lead when all he has to do is get a first down to win the game. So completely made sense to me that he was not going to kick it and settle for a 6-point lead when there was a 10-point lead around the corner. So, and also Wisconsin hadn't been able to move the ball, and his defense had been playing well, and that paid off. I mean, he trusted his defense to make a stop if they didn't get the first down, and that's what happened. So, I mean, it's not just revisionist history that that he didn't get it or that they got the stop. It's that you were 4 yards away from ending the game. And what I've learned about Dan Lanning is he's going to take that chance every time. He will end the game, or he will try to end the game. It has backfired. It backfired at Washington last year. It backfired against Washington 2 years ago. But if you've been paying attention, there was no chance Dan Lanning was kicking a field goal in that situation.
I was not so much a fan of the fake field goal, but I understand your perspective on it. I mean, I could say the same thing in terms of, your defense is playing well. Do you really think they're going to give up more than a field goal? If you go and go and kick a field goal right now, do you really think they're going to give up more than a field goal? So I don't know. I was a little like, okay, that's a little much. That's a little much, Dan. All right. But I can understand why you liked it too. So, but boy, I can tell you one thing. The broadcast didn't like it. I can tell you that much. Woo!
Well, and that's what's interesting about, and you know this, I mean, you're at more games than you're watching on TV, is when you're there, you don't have, and you're just on the sideline, or if you're in the stands, if you're a fan, you don't know how the world is reacting to something in the moment. So, like, I didn't even realize that this was controversial. Like, I thought that was a very Lanning-esque and, sort of, and again, if it converts, this is where I do struggle with a lot of the rhetoric around gutsy decisions. Like, nobody was complaining about the fake punt against Maryland.
Yep.
If that gets blown up and you give Maryland a short field when you're only up by 11 in the third quarter, so it's all results based.
Yeah.
And I do try to take the result of the play out of the decision at least a little bit. It's hard, if not impossible. But I do think that I liked it. I just felt like, this is a chance to end the game. You trust your defense, and it's controlling your own destiny. You have the ability to end the game right here, right now. Or you can keep playing this ticky-tack field position.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shit that can go wrong over the last 2 minutes of a game when you play that way. And listen, a lot of stuff can go wrong when you go balls to the wall too. But it's very true to Dan Lanning's mentality, and it's a much more decisive way to try to win the game. And he used the phrase after the game, and this was in regards to how they played defense and how aggressive they were defensively and rushing the quarterback, but was how do you want to die?
Yep.
And I think that Dan Lanning has proven, I can't just call him Dan or Lanning. It's always Dan Lanning. It's like a full 3-syllable name. I think Dan Lanning has shown that he wants to control his own fate. He wants his team to control its fate on offense. If we can end the game, let's end the game, and let's not be a missed coverage away from giving up a 95-yard touchdown. So I don't know. I liked it. Will it lose the Ducks a game? Will this sensibility, this loose wire Dan Lanning has, lose them a game? It might. It might win them a national championship.
It has in the past.
That's why we have to watch the games.
Thanks, Bill, for your analysis. I guess the one thing that I do appreciate about the way that Oregon plays football is that they are never willing to just lie down and do what is expected. And they are never willing to just say, okay, it's going this way. We're just going to keep playing the game this way, and we're going to hope it works out for us. They always have at least 1 to 2 plays a game where they've got something up their sleeve. And that is a very Oregon way to play football, so I respect it. But it also is just generally good for college football to have a team that's willing to do that sort of thing. So yeah. I like that, Dan Lanning comes from this SEC school of thought, but he doesn't necessarily have that. So I like that he's kind of new school in terms of that. So that's good. I just thought that if I were in that situation, I think I would rather go up 6 and trust my defense in that way than potentially be in the situation they were. And it ended up working out. So it's all good, Mateo Uiagalelei had easily his best game in an Oregon uniform, and he got the crowning jewel moment, which was awesome. So
he's been terrific, by the way. I mean, for a sophomore, he's been outstanding.
God. And he wouldn't be in that position, by the way, if it weren't for Jordan Birch being hurt. Once they, if they get this bye in the first round of the college football playoff, imagine how scary those two are going to be once Jordan is 100% back to full health. Oh my God, it's going to be insane. There's no drop off.
The idea of this Ducks team having, nearly a month, 25 days to get healthy before a quarterfinal game should be scary, I think, to the rest of the country, and to those other 8 teams that would still be playing at that point. I do want to talk Blazers just a little bit because
you want to get your victory lap in?
Well, not really. I mean, because my only point about DeAndre Ayton has been that he is he doesn't have a spot on this team, and so he is their highest paid player. He is their highest paid center. Logically, he should be playing. But when he gets out of the way, you see that good things happen. I think that the other centers they have fit better with the rest of their roster. Donovan Clingan needs to play, and obviously his minutes have been ticking upward, which has been great. Robert Williams needs to play because he needs to get traded. And at that point, in my ideal world, DeAndre Ayton's the backup. But he's a very expensive backup at that point. Is that what's going to happen? Probably not, because the Blazers are too nice. But I do think that this shows DeAndre Ayton, when he's not gobbling up minutes and his usage, which is through the roof, isn't causing the offense to clunk up, and you have a real rim protector out there, more exciting things happen, and the Blazers are better. So, I suppose the flip side of this argument is get DeAndre Ayton back in there. The Blazers are winning too much. You're taking yourself out of the flag lottery. So play DeAndre all the minutes. Shut Donovan down. But I mean, obviously, what you've learned over these 3 games, and it's a small sample size. You've beaten teams that Minnesota has not really come together since trading Karl Towns. Like, there's a lot of skepticism around the league about kind of the state of this Minnesota team right now, like what their level of buy-in and cohesion is. So I don't want to act like the Blazers have figured it out and are going to make a run to the play-in or the playoffs. This is still a flawed team, but you're seeing the flashes that give you hope. You're seeing it especially from Donovan Clingan, especially from Toumani Camara, and most especially of all from Shaedon Sharpe, who's only played like 5 games since getting healthy. He's eclipsed 30 points the last 2 games. He's shooting the ball efficiently. He's getting to the rim. He's digging in defensively. He's making the right passes. It's a small sample size. He's still a really, 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 really young player, but he is, I think, as a year 3 player, which is when you really want to see a young guy sort of establish himself, it does seem like he is doing that.
Can I posit a question to you?
Sure.
Yeah. Do they really need to trade Robert Williams?
The question is, what do you gain by keeping him? Because he's good, he's exciting. Like, I mean, he is probably I wrote last week that I think he's their most likable player. But a lot of this is just
a battle between him and Matisse, I would say.
Okay.
Yep.
So he is. Here's the problem. He is a free agent in 2026. So after another season, he would be highly in demand as a free agent. So if you're keeping him, you need to extend him. And if you're giving him a contract extension, you're extending a guy to be a backup because you have the player of the future at his position. And you are still, despite seeing flashes of growth as a team, you are still at a total talent deficit, and you still don't have your squad. So you need players and you need assets. And Robert Williams is one of your relatively few avenues to acquiring assets. So with his skill set, the way he plays in an extremely team-friendly contract, he's in demand. And so even though it's like, this is great, I like watching this guy play, and he makes the Blazers better, there's, in my opinion, there's really no smart way to move forward with him, because you're either going to lose him in a year and a half when you maybe, in best case scenario, are finally starting to actually try to be good because you've added somebody like Cooper Flagg, and now you've got to pay Robert Williams a lot to stay, to be a backup, or you lose him in free agency anyway. And the Blazers aren't really in a position where they can afford to lose players who they could trade. So I don't see an argument for keeping him, which I think is totally counterintuitive and is like not the way sports should work. Like, hey, my team has a guy I like and I like watching him play. Like, why should we get rid of him? But that's the nature of the business, unfortunately. And I think the business of it all really hurts the fan experience. What do you think? I mean, can you move me off this? Is there a case for keeping Robert Williams?
No, I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on it, to be completely honest with you. I'm on the fence on it right now. I mean, I can see both camps' thought process here. About the fan experience. Like, yeah, it's it's like, oh, we have this guy that, by the way, people have waited to see for quite literally a year, because more than a year, because I don't count last season. So,
Right.
we have this guy who everyone's been waiting for, and all of a sudden he gets on the court, and oh my goodness, the Blazers are winning, and oh, he's really fun to watch, and blah 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 blah. And now it's like, gotta trade him, and it's like, okay, well, that's not exactly the hopeful message you want to send your fan base. All right, it's like, oh, we finally have this guy who's making a difference, and he's got to get out of here. He's got to go. I mean,
Can I? Oh, go ahead if you want to
Yeah,
finish. I just have another thought. But
please take the floor.
I would just also add that you cannot overlook his significant injury history, which is why if you're the Blazers, somebody is going to take him on, and somebody probably will extend his contract. Somebody that needs him for 4 or 5 years, or needs him for 3 years. But like if he is hurt, or you can trade him again in year 4 or something like that. But he's 27 years old now, so you'd be investing in a guy who's going to be 29 and super injury prone going into his 30s, who plays a really athletic, kind of game at the rim. That seems a little bit like a red flag too. So I think it's really about getting him someplace where he's going to make an impact right now on a team that really needs him, whether it's Oklahoma City, Memphis, New Orleans, the Knicks, and making the best deal. But I don't know if we talked about this last week, and if we did, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I did write a column about him and this exact situation last week, because I do think it feels counterintuitive. And I do think that, Blazer fans have not had players that they could really get excited about and invest in. And I went to that game when they beat Minnesota for the first of 2, when they beat Minnesota on a back-to-back.
Mm-hmm.
And he was awesome. And he got a standing ovation at the end of the game when he checked out. And I was just sitting there like, how many players have gotten standing ovations in this building in the last couple of years who weren't named Damian Lillard? Like, it was a galvanizing moment.
Yeah.
In my opinion. And then you turn around, it's like, and he's the guy they need to trade next. So that was the entire foundation of a column I wrote last week that people can go find. But I agree. It's super. I mean, it's just the challenges of being in a position where you're a rebuilding team. Like, players are gonna come and go, and you're gonna like some of them more than others, and some of them are gonna be better than others. And like the idea that you're gonna let go of the players who better, like, of course, trade DeAndre Ayton and keep Robert Williams. If I'm a fan, that's what I want to see. But the business doesn't allow that.
Well, and also, I mean, what are you going to get back for DeAndre right now? That is something we have definitely discussed.
Well, and you can't trade DeAndre. You're not getting anything back for DeAndre, because to trade DeAndre, you're probably giving up more. Somebody's like, hey, we'll take DeAndre for 2 years, but we want Scoot. We think Scoot is a project that we want to like see if we can get more out of him than you guys have. So we'll take DeAndre, but we want Scoot. Or we'll take DeAndre, but we want Tumani Kamara. We'll take DeAndre, but we want picks. And so it's like, and if I'm the Blazers, I'm like, I'd rather ride it out uncomfortably for 2 years with DeAndre Ayton than pay you to take him off our hands. So that's the position they're in.
Yeah, I can buy that logic. I can buy it.
But get excited about Shaedon Sharpe.
Yes, my goodness, thank God. Hello, Shaedon. Welcome back. It's nice to see him playing with that same spark that he had towards the end of his first season here.
Mm-hmm.
That is great. The post game interviews, they could use a little work, but that's okay. We're making progress. We're getting there. We're massaging it a little bit. I do want to ask him at some point, do you ever surprise yourself on the court? Because that guy is just like so matter of fact about everything. It's crazy. I don't think he ever like actually impresses. I wonder if he ever impresses himself. But maybe that's a good characteristic to have as an NBA player. Like never being impressed with yourself, but just being incredibly even keeled, because the man is the definition of it on the basketball court. Yeah, it's been nice to see him doing his thing. I was at the game on, what was it, Wednesday? I think it was Wednesday.
The second Minnesota game.
Yeah. I was going to go to the game on Sunday, and I just didn't feel up to it in my current sick little baby state that I'm in. But yeah, I mean, it's great to see him once again back at that level, because it was a little like touch and go there for a little bit, where it was kind of like, does this guy have the goods that we thought he did? Is this what is happening here? Last year was just a bizarre year for him, to say the least. There was, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back? Blah, 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 So there was a lot of question marks, and so far he's answered all of them. That 3 he hit on Sunday was insane. I mean, I was watching from home and I screamed, "What?" Because there was no. I mean, I watched that play all unfold. I was like, "Oh, this is a fail of a possession," and then somehow he just gets that thing to go in. It was unreal. So yeah, I mean, it's good to see him. It's good to see. I think Scoots had some flashes in there as well. Has he been incredible? No, but I do think he's had some good moments. Donovan, I appreciate him for what he has done. We're still working on the conditioning, but that's okay. He was huffing and puffing on Wednesday, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, it was still an incredibly impressive performance from him. I'm not trying to.
17 points, 12 rebounds, 8 blocks in 31 minutes.
I'm not trying to withdraw. Not acknowledge that. But
and by the way, also playing against a team that has some big dudes out there, he was able to limit himself to 3 fouls in that game, which I thought might have been his most impressive stat.
That's a good point. I like that point. I didn't think about that. I was too caught up in the fourth quarter blockathon that was going on.
Incredible.
Yeah, so I mean, we're still working on the getting ourselves up to NBA starter level minutes in terms of his conditioning, but he sat down at post game and it was you could just feel his pain sitting in the room. It was like, oh, that we're gonna have a long morning tomorrow. That's what tomorrow looks like for Donovan Clingan. But I mean, I appreciate it. I appreciate what he's done. So, yeah.
So before we wrap, I do want to ask you a question about Shaedon Sharpe.
Okay.
And we will start talking about this more in months to come.
Okay.
But he's in his 3rd year, which means he will be eligible this summer and into the fall for his rookie extension. When you are the Blazers and you're in this rebuild that you're in, and you really can't afford to make any mistakes, you can't really afford to miss, you can't really afford to waste a single dollar, honestly. Has Shaedon Sharpe shown you enough to sign him to a max extension?
This is a cop-out deal, but I can't answer that question right now.
So no.
I can't answer it right now. In a few months, I would feel a little bit more... I would feel better about answering that question, but I don't feel like I can give you an answer off of a 5-game sample size.
Well, I think the question, I think that's kind of the answer, right? Is like, do you have enough faith that what you've seen in this sample size and what you've seen from him in his growth over these 3 years, which has been sporadic on the court, has he shown you enough where you are confident that the Blazers, that's the right move? And it sounds like for you, no, you need to see more.
No, I need more. Yeah. No,
and I agree with that. I think you need to see more. You need to see a full season's worth. You need to see him match up with some of these other wings in the league. And, in talking to people around the league, I still have a few sources out there from my time covering the league more regularly. And, everybody agrees that Shaedon Sharpe has all the talent in the world and that he is one of the most athletic and talented players to come through the league in a while. There are questions, I think, about still his ability to make it through a season, his mindset, but it's been unquestionably a very impressive week for him. And if this is still, part of the ascent, then there's a lot of reason to be very excited about Shaedon Sharpe and to believe that he's going to be a foundational piece of this team for a long time. And to say the Blazers need somebody like that is a massive understatement. So it's been an encouraging week just from the standpoint of, do we have any dudes if you're the Blazers? And, it's looking a little bit like yes, which is what they need.
Just enjoy this week because there's going to be a lot more lows along the way.
Brenna Greene not buying the Blazers as a dark horse play-in team. More on that next week on the Oregonian Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As always, Brenna and I will both be at the Oregon State Wazoo game on Saturday. The Not a Truce in the Not Palouse, the Left Behind Bowl, the Ag Bowl, the Land Grant Bowl, the Not My Buddies Bowl. We'll be there in Corvallis. We'll talk about it next week and get ready for the Huskies and do a check-in on the Blazers, who hopefully will be trending back downward toward more lottery balls, because when it comes to the Cooper Flag sweepstakes, this week has been very concerning. Thank you for listening.